Okay, last week we talked about special teams. The next day we had a situation on Spurgeon Road with a suicidal person, and it was interesting after talking about special teams and seeing the media there. And I wanted to just kind of ask the media a little bit to tell their perspective on it. And I'll start with, where's Casey? Yeah, she's chewing. Casey Joyce is not here?
She had a live at 6.
She had to do a live?
Yeah.
Okay. Tristan, you were out there. What was your take on that?
Well, but I got there after.
You got there after the fact?
Tim was there. Tim from the Missoula was there, and before I was. And
Okay. What did you see?
What I see?
What was your take on it?
Well, we were close, so it's not live. It was kind of fascinating because I saw a situation where I didn't know what was going on. You know, I'm just filming it, and it's kind of breaking right there in front of your eyes. You know, just go through that to the back of the car. Police were moving forward, bunched up, very protective.
No, I can't remember. Were you here last week when we talked about special teams? So you didn't see the launcher for the pepper balls and all that. Okay. Irina, what did you see?
Pretty much the same thing. It was kind of scary. So when we got there, we could see like right into that guy's back window. We were like, if he hates the media for some reason, he's gonna turn around. He's gonna blow us away.
And you were a block and a half away about it?
No,
I don't think
about
we're
a block.
about a block.
Okay. What it was a guy had been involved in a hit and run, and he was the runner, and one of our officers who was actually in training that day but had gone home to get a different coach, he was in his private vehicle and he sees this vehicle that everybody's looking for. And he follows it, and the guy pulls over and he gets out and he tells the guy, stay in your car. He's going to call for help. And he hears one gunshot. And so not knowing if the guy took his own life, we take all the precautions in the world before we approach it, and so we don't have an officer shot. And that's what the situation evolves from. And as you guys were there filming it, all of a sudden they heard a guy standing behind him who says something like, he's talking.
It sounded like the guy was having a conversation with the guy in the vehicle. You know, just get out of the car, you're making it worse. What was he saying? You know, I know, man, I know. I mean, everything, it sounded like he was having a conversation with him.
Don't be stupid, get out of the
Yeah,
car.
just get out.
So what'd you do then?
I just ran over to medical and, you know, just let him know, because nobody knew he was back there. You know, as far as PD, you know, just let him know that he was back there.
And so then we had one of our negotiators went and got him, and were able to bring him up and talk to him and find out who the guy in the car was. Make the longer story a little bit shorter, the guy had shot himself, and he was not alive. So that's how it pretty much ended. We did fill the car with pepper in order to, if he was laying down in the seat and he wasn't here, we'd be waiting to take an officer out to drive him out, and it didn't work. And then the officers did approach the car with their weapons drawn in anticipation of having to use them and hoping they didn't. So it was pretty interesting to see the take of the actual media that was in the class. I see Casey just come in. We were talking about that situation last week. Is there anything you wanted to say?
Well, I made the comment at the time that you guys probably shouldn't do this SWAT presentation anymore because...
Yeah, last year after that night we had a barricaded person on Edith Street. So Casey said maybe you shouldn't do this presentation anymore.
But it was interesting because, you know, watching, well, I guess we had just come out of the court decision with Dr. Peschel, and, you know, one of the big points that came out in that was how the police department has the duty to protect the public and the innocent, basically first. And one of the things, I don't know if you saw, they blocked off traffic on Reserve, and people got pretty upset about that, and they were trying to go around, and they were trying to, you know, get out of their cars and walk over to see what's happening. And, you know, all these officers, what they knew was that there was a guy in there and he had a gun. And so that would, you know, be the worst possible thing that they could do. And so, you know, kind of watching them try and do their duty and watching, you know, with the knowledge that I have now, you know, made it a lot more sense.
Do you think that knowledge you have now, as you look at it in a different perspective?
Yeah, absolutely.
Renee?
Rusty, wasn't that the same night in Billings?
The night before in Billings, they had a suicide by cop, and the officer shot and killed the guy there too. Yes, you're right. And it does happen. we talked early on in this class about suicide by cop, and it does happen, and that's why when we respond to these situations, it's kind of like we need to keep our distance. We don't want to walk up in that uniform and have them force the issue, and that's exactly what happened in Billings. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up. Sydney.
I was just wondering how the officer here in Missoula got the guy to pull over since he was in his personal car.
I think he just did it all on his own. The guy, he just followed him, the guy pulled over. But the motor was smoking and everything, so he might have had some kind of car problem.
Kind of active.
But then again, only by the grace of God did the guy not take the gun out and
Yeah.
turn it off. You know, so we're pretty thankful about that.
Make one up. If I say something that sparks a question in your mind, please ask it to me. This is about you guys getting out of this what you want. So if there's something looming, let me know. I will either answer it then, or if I've got it kind of on my plate for later, I may put you off a little bit. But I do make every effort to answer it. The only question I won't answer is about your spouse's coworker's brother who was, with the nuns, donating blood, minding his own business. He got pulled over for no reason, was tased, and taken to jail because there's probably another side to that story. So, a number of times people ask, will say, hey, this happened. Why did they do that? Well, it'd be completely irresponsible for me to try to answer a question about a scenario that I was not involved in. So, other than that, though, take the gloves off and please ask me anything you'd like. Kind of the roadmap for tonight. It's not an outline because that would make this a presentation, right? But it's a roadmap as to where we're going to go. We're going to do a taser demonstration because nobody will hear a word I say until they see someone get tased tonight. So we'll get that out of the way. After that, we're going to talk kind of about the levels of use of force. If there's a tangible, a tool with it, we'll talk about the advantages that come with that tool, the limitations that come with that tool. We'll talk about the factors that the officer needs to calculate through when they're trying to pick the right tool for the right circumstance. We'll talk about the consequences if they pick the wrong tool or do the wrong thing. We'll talk about how that person's judged, and I will tell you, use of force is judged from the minute it occurs until probably the last second of any appeal process, and it's judged on a number of layers, but first-line supervisors, intermediate supervisors, and department heads, city administrators, prosecutors, courts, attorneys. So it is heavily scrutinized. We'll talk about kind of the standards of how your decision should be scrutinized. Then we're going to talk. I'm going to provide you with kind of some just tabletop exercises. I'm going to put you in the position of patrol officer. You'll have any number of these tools available to you that a patrol officer would reasonably have. I want you to fire back your answer. What is your use of force decision? And then we'll say why. Okay. So that's kind of where we're headed. Anything off the top here that we want to get cleared up before we see somebody get tased?
When you use the taser, is it something that you do when somebody's running away, or is there certain elements that have to be in place for you guys to be able to use it effectively? I've heard stories where when the officer shot it missed, and then they're out the taser gun, and the person has a better chance of getting away. So I'm wondering if there's some parameters for the use of that you might go over.
Well, the quick answer, we'll get a little bit more detailed into it later. The quick answer is a person needs to basically signal their intent to resist or not comply. So that could be anything from verbal to non-verbal communication that's going to indicate they're going to fight you, resist you, or flee from you. That's a little piece of the pie. You guys are getting sick of me saying this. But it's a whole totality of circumstance when you're making these decisions, much like any other criminal investigation or, we say that a lot in the DRE world about, this little piece of the puzzle, and you put all these things together. DRE, you've got a lot of time to make that decision, and use of force, you have that much time to make the decision, and frankly, the consequences are higher. So, answer your question, yeah, we will, and we have, and we'll continue to use tasers against people who are fleeing from us, provided they meet some other criteria as well. When, there's got to be a good way to make decisions in the police departments. Some assignments are not quite as good as others. getting tased isn't the greatest assignment. So we always fall back on the game everybody played when you were kids, and that's rock, paper, seniority. We played it with Brad Wall, and he lost the seniority part of it. So just kidding. Brad, come on up. He's actually volunteered. He's one of our newer officers, and he's going to show you what it's like to experience a taser application. There's a couple different ways tasers can be applied. One's what they call a drive stun, which is without the probes on in this capacity. The other is shooting the probes at people. There's 2 probes inside this cartridge. It's basically a one-time use deal. They reach out. This is a 21-foot cartridge. There's varying lengths for different applications, but this is the general patrol application here. So this runs for a 5-second cycle. I'll ask Brad if he wants the whole thing or wants me to stop it when he's had enough.
But you just go walking down.
I'll explain. Remind me if I don't remember to come back to that later. But we run a 5-second cycle on people on the street all the time.
He wants
so.
the full 5, he said.
Want the full 5 going for a shirt, huh?
Yep.
There's a red dot sight on it for the top probe, so that'll show me where the top probe's going. The other one's at an 8-degree angle down. So the further we get, the further that spread is. So full 5 seconds here then.
Full 5.
Taser!
Just walking down. Walking down. Oh!
And he's got a shirt.
Okay, you all right? Oh, my calves are cramping.
Hold on just a second. Hold on that one, Steve. Hold on. He's doing probe removal. This is as good a time as any to talk about probe removal. Our department policy is that when it is not in a sensitive area, which would be head, neck, groin, female breast, we take the probes out on scene there. It's an 1/8-inch barb hook, kind of like a fishing hook, and so alleviate some comfort to them. There's no big medical risk to us doing it. You hold your hand here and you pop it out in one quick jerk to remove it. If anybody wants to come up, you can see Truman take this other one out. It's in his pants. There's not a lot to see. And then you can yes, and then you can look at the. Did you bandage the back already? Okay.
No,
Then you can look at the little puncture wound that it makes there. So, go ahead. It's a one quick pull deal. These are a biohazard, so they need to be protected, of course, to prevent exposure to other people. And we tuck them back into the cartridge like such.
So the wires on this taser are what, 21 feet, Mike?
These are 25 now, 25 feet. Yeah. They have varying lengths for different applications. Generally, these are your average taser application with no major other, use of force issue or anything like that. These are really of no evidentiary value. We simply take them, wind them up, tuck these, and dispose of them. Now, if this was a taser application that failed or led to an in-custody, there's an in-custody death afterwards and something major happened, these can be of value because they can help determine distance, from the officer to the subject and so on, based on how much stretch there is in the wire and so on.
There's also micro dot confetti inside of that cartridge that at the time the probes are expelled, there's little tiny micro dots with the serial number of that cartridge that fly out onto the ground out in front of the officer, which can give you an idea of the direction that the officer was fired, facing when he fired, and different things like that. So there's some forensic value to those micro dots.
What's the voltage on that?
It's got a little tiny. There's about 20 or 30 of those they call AFID.
You got it?
Stands for anti-felon identification chip. And they're originally designed for civilian accountability. Civilians in this situation of a crime, they can see who they sold that cartridge to. The cartridge number correlates with the AFIS number and figures out that way. It's also they're also valuable to police for
Check that.
investigation as to who fired the taser, if there was more than one deployed and so on. So.
They told me that they let me go down to my knees and go down. My knees weren't going to bend. It was purely I locked up completely. Painful. It's weird because you feel it. You hear it kind of going.
Yeah.
You feel that too. It kind of goes with the sound. Feels like a long 5 seconds.
We could talk all evening about taser, and I'm willing to, certainly willing to hit the major points, but we've got a whole rest of the use of force curriculum to touch on. The high points for taser, it's a remarkable tool. I'll start right there. It records all this data internally. When we purchase these, you turn them on, and the first time you pull the trigger, it documents the date and time, and that kicks in your warranty, and then it keeps a internal log of the date and time and duration of every squeeze, every trigger pull. So it's of great value in internal investigation and criminal prosecution and so on. The big high profile term is 50,000 volts, and so I need to address that right off the bat. 50,000 volts is the amount of pressure that it exerts to send a charge out of the taser as it leaves the taser. 50,000 volts doesn't go through the person. On these, drops to about 1,200 volts once it hits the person. Still, that's kind of seems like a high number, right? Voltage is not what hurts you. Amps are what hurts you. So the amount of amperage in this is 0.004 approximately amps. To put that in perspective, a 110 outlet has like 16 amps. A Christmas light bulb has about 1 amp. These are 0.004 amps. Very, very low amperage. But they're forced out with a high amount of pressure, a high amount of voltage. So when you hear 50,000 volts, holy cow, that's unbelievable, right? Well, you can walk up and put your hand on one of those Van Greer, whatever they are, the big generator things that make your hair stand up. Those are 1,000,000 volts. You don't see people falling over and dying when they touch those. 50,000 volts, a little to nothing to do with safety. It's the power that sends that charge. And the reason it has so much charge is because it needs to be able to jump the gap. There's about a 2-inch gap that these probes can jump. So by having 50,000 volts there, if it gets caught up in clothing, West Montana in the winter, right, that's something we're going to be up against a lot. Provided we don't have more than 2-inch cumulative gap, at 50,000 volts, it gets it across that gap to the person. It has nothing to do with the safety. Here's an analogy for you. If you took a bowling ball and dropped it off a 100-foot high elevation onto a person, then you take a ping pong ball and you do the same thing. The elevation, the force that's going down, that's basically equivalent to your voltage. The amps is the difference between the bowling ball and the ping pong ball. So does that make sense? I mean, like I said, you can walk up and touch those big generators that have 1,000,000 amps, and it doesn't do anything to make your hair stand up. Or I'm sorry, 1,000,000 volts. So, you put it into different, in a different context, it just kind of illustrates the difference there. And so, don't get hung up on the 50,000. And like I said, that's 50,000 volts as it's leaving the device. It drops down about 1,200 when it's actually into the person. So, yes.
So the barb doesn't have to go into the skin; you can just go into the coat, and the voltage will continue on and do essentially the same thing. Correct.
Yep. We had a taser app a couple of weeks ago where that's exactly what happened. Never even touched the guy, but it got close enough to gain his compliance. So
why do you need to have the barbs on the end?
To hold it there once it does hit. It gets caught up in the clothing and or the skin and holds it there. So that's the technical part of it. The nuts and bolts part of it, there is, and there's no cartridge on here, so I'll point this towards you, but it's not there. There's a white LED light on it for low light stuff, and the red dot sight, which is just that, and that is for the top probe. So the probes are 4-degree angle in each direction, which makes it multi-directional. You don't have to worry about which way you put it on. But when you level that 4 degrees on the top off, it makes for an 8-degree decline. So obviously that spread gets greater and greater and greater. At about 7 feet, you have about a foot drop. And the optimal range is between about 7 and 13 or 14 feet. Because that's a good blend of being close enough to accurately hit it, far enough away that you get spread. And I'll talk about what that is, why that's important. So I don't know what we shot here. I was right here somewhere, right? Yeah, we were 10 or 12 feet, so you saw there's a good spread. It's his middle back down into his butt there. So 5-second cycles, he took all 5 seconds, way to go. You know, when I was at the instructor school in Seattle, I wimped out, you know, like, I think I still yelled stop before they pulled the trigger. So I had my little short burst over there, and I get back, and Chris Almond, another instructor, he goes, you know, you don't get a shirt if you don't do 5 seconds. I said, yeah, I have a job, I can buy my own shirts. And he said, but you're an instructor, you've got to have a shirt. So, you know, I'm not strong enough to stand up to that. So I caved. So I actually have taken 2 rides. One was just a little wimpy one, and then the 5-second one. And Brad is right. It's only 5 seconds. But on the street, when someone gets taser application, they get a full 5-second duration. Does anybody know why?
If they're on drugs, they might be able to withstand it. You want to make sure, set it in, make sure it works.
Good. So you get, you know, full effectiveness. Is that what you're saying, rather than just a little blast? That's true.
I mean, is part of it that you want to make it uniform so everybody gets the same amount?
That's a very important part of it. Everybody gets the same amount, and it's not to be paranoid of perception, but perception's reality sometimes. And one officer may just not feel like it's necessary, may stop it after 2 seconds. It has nothing to do with the person's race, gender, ethnicity, you know, where they live, what kind of car they drive, or anything. Other than that, that's the way that officer use. Another officer may have no problem letting it run for 5 seconds. So over time, you could have some appearance that could be completely unfounded, but the appearance can be dangerous. And so you run the full 5 seconds. The other major part of it, that's the first part. The other major part of it is that is a huge window of opportunity to take control of the person during that 5 seconds. Brad was not really in a position to fight anybody in this room for that 5 seconds. And so we really need to seize that opportunity while he's incapacitated by that to grab his hands and get him in a position to handcuff him or, you know, control him something. My God, so they are done fighting. But if they're still armed or whatever, you know, you need to tell them after that 5 seconds, you have got to put that weapon down, and you've got to put your hands to your side or whatever, and they're like, Jesus, what did you do that for, yo? Telling you need to do is give them these orders if they try to get up or whatever, another 5-second application, and now they realize, oh, I'm Pavlov's dog here, I know what happens now after this. And so it is not uncommon to see two cycles, or sometimes even more. Like I said, seizing that window at the first cycle is great. That's how we you know, keep those number of cycles down. It's not always possible, practical.
So you're saying once the barbs are out and they're in it, that you can then do the gun again, so it's another 5 seconds. Somebody else doesn't have to shoot.
Right. So when you activate it, I can shut it off at any time.
Okay.
So now if I'll let this run, little timer. You don't want me to estimate the time, so put a timer on it. So now you say, you know, put the knife down or, you know, whatever, put your hands behind your back or whatever, and everything's fine here. I mean, the charge has stopped. They equate to a faucet. When the faucet's on, the water's running. And this is on, the electricity is running. When the faucet's off, it's off. Done. I mean, there's not a little trickle in there, and it's off. So, does that answer your question? So, yes.
How often is there injury to them from the fall?
Very good point. And that's something you need to consider in your use of force decision. You're responsible for all of it. You're not just responsible for the taser application, right? So if he's standing on his third floor balcony, you can't just tase him and say, hey, the taser was good, he just fell off. You're responsible for all that. And so it's an important decision to make. You can think of a number of instances. You know, somebody wanted to commit suicide from a bridge over a body of water. Not a good place for a taser application. So you need to consider that secondary injury. Limitations on it.
Go ahead, Mick.
Limitations are, it's a one-time use deal. We do have some extended magazines, we'll shut that off, where you can put another cartridge on the end, or we have some of these holsters where you can put other cartridge on. But that's a serious limitation. 90% of patrol officers out there have a one-time use deal, just like what you saw here. Now I can still do drive stun, thank you, let me show you. The probes are gone. I can still do drive stun stuff. You know, you can tell that hurts. So if you shot and missed, now this person's coming at you. You know, that's better than nothing. You can put them with that, but you don't have another set of cartridges.
So you can put that up against a person.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Advantages to it is there are a number of good advantages to this. It's not just pain compliance. It's muscle incapacitation. You know, he talked about how his legs weren't going to bend. That's what it does. It tenses up your muscles, and it's more than pain. People can fight through pain. If you are on under the influence of alcohol or drugs in a highly emotional state, or you have a lot to lose, you can fight through a lot of pain. If it means losing your wife, losing your career, losing your freedom, and all that, you can get through a lot of pain. The difference is, if you don't have the muscles to do it, it incapacitates you, and that's the real value in taser versus other pain compliance stuff. Another nice advantage to it is you don't have cross-contamination stuff. You know, if you need to go to jail and I spray you, these guys all get part of your benefit, because that OC just kind of emanates around and it cross-contaminates people. We a number of complaints about that, including during the Hell's Angels run, where people say, I've done anything wrong, other than they wouldn't leave. But they got some of the cross effects. You don't get that on taser. Another big advantage. Do we have anybody here from our civil liability firm? We did this user certification class a couple of years ago, and a couple of the attorneys that represent us in civil stuff were there, and they said, here's the beauty of taser is that you don't have post-care problems. We are responsible to take care of people after we apply force against them. So if it's a OC-10 application, we need to try to make a reasonable effort to decontaminate them, clean them up, and reduce that pain and stuff. The beauty of this is that faucet, right? The water's off, and this is off, it's over. You saw him, he didn't flail around up here for 5 to 10 minutes. When it was over, he breath and it was over. So another real nice advantage to it. The distance is pretty good, 20 up to 25 feet now. Although that's, it has its limitations, but there's no one perfect tool that is perfect for all circumstances. So yes.
I noticed the two guys that were holders on him, both wore rubber gloves. If another person is in contact with the person you're tasing, do they share in that benefit of? So it's not a charge. It's a charge only to the person who's got the barbs in.
It's a charge between the barbs. So electricity's dumb, is what they always say, right? It takes the shortest path between 2 points. So that gets me to our spread. So when you have this, I talked about as pain compliance because there's no spread there. Here's my electrodes there, 2 silver dots, right? So electricity goes straight between those 2 points, and it doesn't veer away from those. Same thing with the probes. So he got one, here and here,
right?
And it's seizing up all the muscles in between,
right?
So if I'm an officer, you saw they were holding them, and it didn't affect either of the officers holding them because they weren't within those 2 points. If they reach back and put their hand between those 2 points, they're going to get it. If they touch the wires, they will get a watered-down version of it. These little electrical wires have a light coating on them, and you kind of feel it. We've been in fights on the street where the guy gets his taser application, he goes down, and the other officers are seizing that opportunity, right? That window of opportunity. They get in there and they get a wire across their leg and they go, woo, you know. But it doesn't dump them like it did Brad. So it's an excellent point. What we're looking at is the spread between those 2 points. And so it goes back to my optimal range of 7 to 13 feet or so. It's close enough I can hit it, even I can hit a person that close. But it gave me good spread. You know, what was that? You know, a couple of feet worth of spread. If I go back to, it's a 25-foot maximum distance, right? I go to 25 feet, you know, that's a lot harder to hit, particularly the lower body part, because you can probably hit the red dot sight on a nice broad back or chest or whatever. But when you're talking a couple of legs, especially if they're moving, and that second probe can be tough to hit. It's great spread if you can get it, but it's a little tough to get. And conversely, when you're too close, it creates, you know, less and less spread, which means pain, but less and less muscle incapacitation. So that makes
Both probes have to hit for the actual.
both probes have to hit, or these probes can serve as the follow-up, can serve as the other probe. So if I'd have missed Brad, I'd run up there and I've got the farthest point away from that other probe. But in reality, if you miss with one probe, you know, the training is that you immediately follow with the drive stunt to make the circuit, complete the circuit. Because I shoot him with one probe and the other probe goes off into la la, he'll go, ow, someone poked me. There's no electricity there, right? You need to make,
circuit.
You can make the circuit. So.
Which can also happen if you have an officer wrestling with somebody on the ground, and if the officer gets one probe and the bad guy gets one probe, they both get it.
Yeah.
If they're holding on to each other.
We had 2 people fighting. You know, I've never done this. I've never even heard of any incredible stories where it's been done. But you know, the argument is, if you got 2 people wrestling around, if you can put a probe in each one, done deal.
They're gonna be best friends.
Yeah. And what we do as a training exercise, when you get certified as a taser user, there's a voluntary exposure, which is what Brad did. And there's good benefit to why you would want to do that. I'll talk about that in a second. But not everybody wants to get shot with the probes, and realistically it takes a while. So what we'll do sometimes to speed things up, save on cartridges, and do things that people are more willing to do is kind of what we call a chain. So you could get, you know, a number of people. We've done it with like 5 or 6 officers. They link arms, and we wouldn't use these probes, but we'd use like clips. You put a clip on a person on each end, and turn it on, and you get everybody from plan to plan B. So, you know, we could link arms and go all the way around here. I can see if I can set a record. It gets everybody into it. And the distance is really predominant.
There has been some controversy about the taser, and I guess it's some deaths that some medical examiners have tried to link to the taser, but other people say that there aren't any deaths that are caused by the taser. What is your knowledge?
Taser International standpoint is that none of them are caused by tasers. The taser's been involved in an incident, and the person later ended up dead. There's some common themes among almost all of them, and generally the common themes are drug consumption for the person, particularly stimulants like methamphetamine, cocaine, physical exertion, so they're either running from or fighting with the police or somebody else, positional asphyxia. There's a lot of things that contribute to it. Like exactly what you said, some examiners have said, I believe there was 2 cases at the time my manual was printed 04 manual that they said, we think that the taser caused these 2 deaths out of several hundred in custody. And Taser International says, no, you know, that's your expert. Our expert says none of them happened.
Taser International, the manufacturer?
Yes, sorry.
So then where's your liability if you tase someone who's high on drugs and they die? I mean, are you still liable?
We're using the product as it was sold to us, as we trained it, and as we train our officers to use it. We were responsible enough in researching the product before we bought it that we feel comfortable it did not cause that. I guess everybody could be sued for something, but I really don't feel that when we purchase a product that's been examined, researched and studied, and we've also researched it, and then we use it as it's designed to be used. I think we're on a good foot.
The exception to that is the instance like Mike described where you tase somebody on the third floor balcony and they fall to their death. Did the taser cause their death? No. Did we cause their death? Indirectly by the use of the taser, we did. But the manner of causing death would be a 3-story fall, not the fact that the taser was involved.
So are there cases that you're, I guess, reluctant? I mean, like that, you would reluctant to use it, but not necessarily if they're in growth or
I missed that, sorry.
you would be reluctant to use it if it was on the third story, balcony, but you wouldn't necessarily train your officers to be reluctant to use them if the person was really high on drugs, even though there are cases that document that might have caused them.
No, primarily because that might not be a factor we know. Their drug influence might not be something we know. So, conversally, I would argue that people on drugs are potentially more of a threat to you and other people. And so an increased use of force is probably more appropriate.
What it requires is good post-application monitoring of the subject to watch for any of the signs or symptoms that come with these deaths that have been documented in previous instances.
Yes.
So if he wasn't being held up there when he was tased, do people fall to the floor? Do they flop around? Do they just stiffen up on the floor? Or?
He'd go down. Yeah, I'm almost certain. Unless his balance was perfect and he was having to be upright, but he'd go down. He doesn't have the control of his muscles to stop himself. Second, I really will tell you, secondary injury from the fall is a heck of a lot more significant than those little puncture wounds and the pain. How are we doing on the taser issue? I guess I would say this, that for as long as people have been being arrested by police, there's been some people who have died in police custody, and as we go through generations of technology and things that change, there are different hot buttons, and there have been batons at one point, they've been OC-10 spray at some point, and really where I think kind of probably winding towards the end of the taser hot button. I mean, it's been huge, and I really think with education and so on, that I think it's really a lot more acceptable. They come in yellow and black for the conscientious consumer. We have yellow. Anybody have an idea why?
It's visible.
It's not confused as it can.
Yeah, visible to all the parties involved here. It's visible to me, and it's visible to everybody who sees me. And I'll tell you, it's remarkable. The first week we had them out there, everybody noticed these things. It was unbelievable. Even with the coat, they covered most of the things. See it? Did you go taser? They say Google's now been added to the dictionary, right? Tased has been, should be added. Everybody knows the terminology now. It's actually brand new. It's the world's greatest advertising. For us, it's yellow. It's a taser. We know what we have in our hand, and under a critical incident, some of those things can become skewed, and so we encourage people to carry them on the offside, like mine is. If you had it in close proximity to your real firearm under stress, you could grab the wrong one, and that's not a good outcome for anybody. So I think with the color combination and where we place it, it goes a good distance to making sure we've got the right tool for the right scenarios. I don't want to cut taser off if you've got something on your mind, because I know it's important to a lot of people, but we have a lot of other things to talk about, so whenever you're ready to move on. This one.
I just have one question. We already covered it, just let me know and I can ask you, but we can get them later. You see on television people who have been tasered more than once in the same stop. And those are the folks with some real constitution. How many times can you do that?
How many times can you apply a new taser application?
Right, can you apply a new taser application?
How many times can you? We've had a situation one time where the person believed to be armed was hiding underneath a car or tree or something. It had some object in his hand that they could not identify as dark. Did a taser application and didn't comply, and another one. He had several taser applications for a person before I guess they get an opportunity to see that window of opportunity. There's no limit county or this stuff. Search and seizure, use of force, two greatest areas in the law. I think. But there's no limit that says you can only do 4 taser applications. That 5th one you're fired. There's nothing like that. It all is going to fall back onto reasonableness and necessity of why you did it. And you will be held accountable for every 5-second cycle. Does that make sense?
Do you have any statistic of how often it's used, like in a month or a year in the police force here?
I don't. We've done 2 in the last couple of weeks that I know of. Do you know the number?
You know, I don't know the number. I'm trying to think if I think there was 37 last year.
It's like everything kind of seems to come in peaks and valleys. Everything seems to be cyclical like that. We just had 2 in 2 weeks, and we could maybe go months without another one. So,
how do you track use of force statistically? Maybe you get a taser incident, obviously when somebody discharges a firearm. Are there levels of engagement, and how do you categorize it?
There are. I'll go ahead and talk about that just a little bit, because that's something that Chris Odlin and that's the responsibility for he and I. But what we do is officers, when they utilize force, they are required to document it in their written report. And then their supervisor also has a form that they have to fill out and describe what the use of force was, what the effects were, and they basically use that as a checklist to make sure that the officer has covered adequately all those issues that are important to us. The number of, for instance, it gets down to technical details, the number of cycles that a person used, the number of seconds worth of chemical spray that may have been used. We start our use of force with any in terms of them having to report it, is any physical force that goes beyond just customary touching for the purposes of placing handcuffs on a person or anything like that. So if it's a wrist twist lock, for example, in order to get compliance from Mike, if I'm doing some kind of a compliance hold, okay, or if I do, this is the one that I really love the most, the mandibular, and telling, come on, Mike, come with me, then an officer has to provide documentation in his report that he used that certain level of force. So it can be anything, like I say, as mundane as just physical contact to persuade a person to cooperate with them, to up to the level of lethal force. Okay, and so any of those options in between are required to be documented and reported. Even just drawing your weapon or drawing your taser in order to gain physical compliance from a suspect is the basis for a report. What we don't require, for instance, if an officer responds to an alarm call at a building and they get there and there's an open door and they go through the building with a partner and they do a search and they come back out and they've never had any contact with anyone inside, then they don't have to write a report over that. But otherwise, anytime they display their firearm, even if it's just on a high-risk traffic stop or a known-risk traffic stop where they're doing a felony takedown, that sort of thing, they have to document those as well. We had 142 of those in 2006. I'm not sure what the 2007 was. It was up just slightly.
142 drawn weapons.
Total applications of force.
How long have you been using the taser?
2004.
Yes, about 40. Coming up on 40.
Have you seen any changes in the overall number or the distribution since? I guess I'm wondering what it's replacing.
Well, it mostly replaced pepper spray. And the number of injuries to individual officers involved in physical confrontations with people is down from those kinds of physical confrontations. The number of serious injuries to suspects is down. Believe it or not, as much as Mike's pointing to the fact that the fall is actually, that's the riskiest part, is when they fall and can hit themselves on the ground. The same thing happens if we have to run and chase somebody down. Only 2 people usually wind up on the ground in that particular case. We have a suit going on right now where in the jail, one of our officers was involved in a scuffle with a subject where just the 2 of them were in the DUI room. He had already finished the DUI processing, and he had shut off the tape and had taken the tape out and says, okay, now we need to go back over to the remand area and to turn him over to the jailer. Well, during that period of time, the guy got out of control. They both wound up on the ground. The suspect wound up with a fractured skull. And so these physical altercations, now in that particular case, the officer is back there, he has no taser, he has no pepper spray, he has no gun. Only thing he can resort to is physically wrestling with the guy, and sure enough, they go to the ground and wind up with a broken skull. So everything has its pluses and minuses, and we feel pretty confident that one of the things we're moving towards is eliminating unnecessary force. It's really hard to quantify excessive or appropriate levels, because there's those cases where you choose a force at a certain level because that's what you have trained to view as most appropriate. But it is possible that it might have been resolved with a lower level of force. But as long as it's still a reasonable level of force, then that's okay. And that's what Michael talks some more about when he talks about some of these various tools that we do use. But one of the biggest things I say that we try to work on, Rusty's and my goal would be to reduce unnecessary force. I mean, we want our people to be safe. We want them to take care of the community. We want the community to be safe. What we really care about is eliminating as much of the unnecessary force as possible, and that's what we do with our training.
Some of the stats here, you're talking about the injuries and stuff that have gone down. The city of Cincinnati, officer injuries down 70%. This is upon implementing taser. Cincinnati, officer injuries down 70%. Orange County, Florida, officer injuries down 80%. Austin, Texas, suspect injuries down 80%. Phoenix, Arizona, suspect injuries down 67%. The number of lethal force incidents in Phoenix down 54%. In Orange County, Florida, down 78%. And the number of use of force complaints, Cincinnati down 50%, Austin down 32%, Columbus, Ohio down 25%. So there's good advantages to using it to eliminate things on a higher level. Break time?
Yes. That was exactly what I was going to suggest.
Come back here and eat all the rest of the food, whatever we have.
Says it's generally a once and you're done type of deal, other than the drive stun, or if you have another cartridge. A little bit limited range. 25 feet pretty darn good, better than the OC-10. Not quite as good as beanbag or something like that. But you kind of got to take the good with the bad on some of these. Pepper ball indirect application would be just about like the OC spray, except it gives us a little bit more range. We don't have to be within 6 or 8 feet there. It could be 20 feet or more with it. So you kind of see a trend here. It's the good with the bad deal. There's parts of each one of these tangible tools that we use that are really good. There's parts that are limited to that. And if anybody comes up with the one magic bullet that will work on everybody all the time with no failures and no limitations, let me know. I'll be your silent partner. I got like $2. I can fund that project because you'll be selling to every law enforcement agency in the world. There is no magic bullet. There never will be a magic bullet. The best we can do is embrace technology. As new things come in, push the stuff that's out of date aside and take things that are responsible and effective for current law enforcement needs, and always keep lots of options open. Swarm technique. Advantages? Sorry?
Oh, dog pile?
Yeah. Dog pile.
Fun.
Yeah. You can get them down and control them pretty quickly. You know, potential for injuries, not too bad.
It's not quite as easy when they're naked.
Yeah, and sweaty or bloody.
Sweaty.
It's like grabbing a greased up water balloon in a pool or something.
And Mike, what's the medical condition of a person that they're going through when they're on drugs and that and they have that and basically their core temperature is
Excited delirium.
Excited delirium.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of situation where oftentimes, you know, a pig pile or dog pile with a swarm technique is about the only thing we can do. I mean, they don't even respond to tasers.
And you know, and back to the taser, thinking about a person like that, and we've had a bunch of them. I mean, not a bunch of them, a few of them recently. I can remember where you have a taser application, the person goes down, and you give them some more instructions, and they're just out of their mind. It's been with hallucinogens, LSD stuff. We had a couple runs right in a row where they are just absolutely not comprehending what you're saying. So as soon as the 5 seconds off, right, water's off, and they're just through the roof again. And it's if you don't get the 5 seconds back on them, they're flailing so much if they break these wires, you're done, right? I mean, there's nothing to these things. So that's how strong they are. And so, you know, it comes a time where you need mass, and you get people on it. So, yes?
Can you handcuff somebody while they're being tasered?
Yeah, you should. You know,
I mean,
if you can.
During the 5 seconds, you can get down there, and there's not going to be much of a shock or whatever to the person cuffing them.
No, it's covered briefly. If you rub up against the wires, you can get a little zinger. If you get your hands down in, you know, on the body between the two probes, you're going to get some of that. But it's not like getting the application against you yourself. And you really should. You really should be prepared that when they're taking that 5 seconds, it's a perfect opportunity to go in there and get a hold of them, because when the 5 seconds over, you don't know how they're going to react again. So, yes.
So you guys travel alone, and so are you ever able to use the taser yourself and cuff somebody if they're being very resistant, or you have to wait for a backup for somebody else?
We wait. We have the luxury in town here to wait. And I've seen some videos of people in real rural environments where, you know, he was going to be waiting until breakfast if he waited for somebody. So, you know, what this officer I remember did was he tased a guy. He ended up tasing a couple, 3 times. And then at the end, the guy was like, "I'm done. I get it now. My learning curve's a little low, but I get it now. I am done." He convinced the officer he was done. The officer put the taser down on the ground and went up and handcuffed him. Could be done. We're fortunate enough that we're just, you know, seconds away from help. And so if I was doing a taser application with no help around, once the person was down and compliant, you know, I'd be giving him those orders. Stay there, don't move, and you're not going to get another ride, but you need to stay there until some other officers come and handcuff you.
During the cycle with a taser, do you have to be, and you decide to get your hands on the suspect, can you damage that person by trying to move his arms or something if the taser is flexing those muscles?
No, they're not flexed to that extent. I mean, we've done it in training and on the street where he was rigid, but he wasn't rigid to the point where he's going to snap a bone. You know, I'd grab him by the elbow, grab him by the wrist, and bring his hands back, you know, with good controlled force.
There's been 2 or 3 cases in the United States where individuals with extreme osteoporosis, just from taking the shot, not grabbing onto them, anything, but just taking the shot and falling to the ground, they have broken bones.
Another little training point. It's not crucial for your knowledge, but it's a training point for us. We need to understand, and this goes back to advantages for doing a voluntary exposure. You need to understand that it's a pretty intense deal. So if I'm a police officer who's never been tased, I don't know what it's like, and I tase a guy, and he goes down, and I tell him, "Get your hands behind your back," and he doesn't do it, how can he not do that? Here's 5 more. You know, and, you know, well, what could be going on is, we're playing catch up here, right? I mean, the person's been through quite a bit of pain. He's probably, you know, reeling from that. And he hears what's going on, and he may not really comprehend it and react to it. So it's a good training point. And one of the advantages to having voluntary exposure, which means getting shot in the training, is that you've been through that and you can kind of relate. I know why this guy's not immediately doing what I tell him. It's because gray matter's playing catch up here, and it takes a bit of patience. You know what I'm saying? You kind of need to jack down and remember what it was like when you got your taser application, and you can understand why maybe he's not just a yes-er. I mean, sometimes they are, but sometimes they're like, well, what the hell? And you tell them again, maybe you tell them a third time, they're like, okay, all right, I'm with you now. And it's kind of that, you know, it's a lot of stress that the body has gone through, and it takes some catch up. Get a little bit off the track here a little bit, but other good reasons for voluntary exposure is there's a humanitarian effect. You know, you don't ever want to use any of these things maliciously, but certainly if you've been through it, it gives you a whole new perspective. It's not just fun. I mean, it is. You know that it's painful. You know that it's not comfortable, and it's a really like I said, it's a humanitarian type of angle on it. And the other thing is a self-defense issue. Does anybody know what I'm talking about with that? Remember when I talked about any tool you bring to the fight, you really have some obligation to retain that. If somebody gets this from you and they're prepared to use it on you, and you've been through it, and you know what it's like, and you know how you're going to react, and you know how defenseless you're going to be, it's going to help you make a use of force decision. And I'm cautious not to make people's use of force decisions for them. Every situation is different, but you know, you need to seriously consider using some lethal force or some other force to avoid being tased yourself. You know, we view them as tools in our hands and weapons in someone else's. And so that's another good reason to have a voluntary exposure, because if it came to that, you chose to use deadly force, it would be something that you could fall back on and say, this is why I did it, because I know that if he chose to shoot me with this and just hold this down, and if I hold this down, the 5 seconds doesn't stop, the 5 seconds keeps running. It'll run for 20 seconds if you hold this down. Think how incapacitated and what somebody could do to you if they could incapacitate you for 20 seconds, let the trigger up and incapacitate you again immediately for 20 more seconds. You know, they could completely disarm you, and they could use your weapon against you. So I'm sorry that I neglected that as reasons for doing voluntary exposures. And I would say that 95% of our officers do the voluntary exposure after we tell them that. When they walk in, they're like, whatever, dude. I carry a gun and you don't make me get shot with it. So I'm not going to get shot with a taser. And then we explain to them the benefits to them to doing it. Most of them come around. Some of them are just plain.
If you tase somebody by putting the taser against their body or against them, will it leave trail marks?
It will. Well, not a pro. Yeah, it leaves a little burn signature. Yep, one for each contact. Yes, and that's how the energy, when the energy is being expelled, it changes the heat, and it leaves a little signature on it. They're small. Yeah, they're just fractions of an inch. And generally, the way they end up looking worse is because it's pain. Remember, it's not muscle incapacitation; it's pain. Hurts like a bugger. So people are squirming around, and so when you've got these contact points against the skin and someone's moving like that, it drags that around the skin and it ends up looking pretty bad. But if you were just contact pointing out without any movement, it's just a little burn box. Okay, where are we at here? Pepper ball, direct application pepper ball stuff. It's on the same intermediate use of force level as like taser and OC-10. So you're hitting people with a little projectile, pretty darn low use of force, low potential for injury. They basically have a point blank range rating. I mean, you don't have to be X amount of feet away from them, but they're gonna leave a welt or whatever, so they don't go any higher than that. Impact weapons. So let's talk. We'll lump the AST and the baton together, or the PR. We'll lump them into batons. What's your advantage to a baton?
Creates a physical barrier, at least if you can utilize it close.
Good. So it's
say if swinged you with a bat or a pipe, you've got something that can probably help you deflect the blow.
Could be a defensive tool to block things. It has the same benefit that a lot of these tools do, is that it's a deterrent. You know, tasers a heck of a deterrent now. People know what they look like. OC-10's a pretty good deterrent. Same thing would go with batons. They're a good deterrent. People know that, ooh, that's a big stick, that's gonna hurt. Any other advantages you can think of?
Keeps them a distance from you.
Right, PR24s and asks to extend your reach, so it keeps that circumference around you there. Pretty good pain compliance, you know. So if you have a person who doesn't have something else that's going to help him defeat the pain, pretty good pain compliance. What about disadvantages? The last thing I said is also kind of a disadvantage. Pain compliance can be overcome. I'm sorry?
You can hurt them pretty bad.
Absolutely. I hate to keep referring to the same area bars, but we were in another bar in the same geographical area as the elbow room, and different incident. Again, one hell of a fight with the guy, and ended up striking him with a baton. You know, it was like 6 or 7 times. He just kept getting up and fighting. And so we have good pain compliance, but what have we learned about pain compliance? Alcohol influence, drug influence, diminished mental capacity, high drive, all that stuff can fight through a fair amount of pain. And so, although it can be good, it can also be kind of ineffective. About some other disadvantages or limitations.
You could take it away, you over years.
Yeah. Yep. It's just like I keep harping on. We have a duty to retain these things, and sometimes due to sweat, rain, blood, whatever, you can lose your grip on these things, and it goes from being a tool to us to a weapon to another person. Potential for injury is up there. I mean, people who get hit with batons have some pretty significant bruising, tendon ligament damage, bone damage. So some significant limitations with batons. And you know, I gotta say, they're almost offline with us.
And I'll tell you, from an administrative standpoint, more of the basis for that was the fact that, well, for starters, when we got the tasers, all of a sudden here we have one more thing that these officers have to fit on their belt.
We just eat more
and
bigger belts.
Yeah, and some of us have no problem. I mean, you can carry all the toys in the world, but some of these guys, they literally run out of space. And your duty belt right now, Mike, probably weighs somewhere around 20 pounds. By the time you throw in all the accoutrements. But the other thing is the sincere reluctance of an officer to use it. We had so few instances where officers would pull it out and willingly strike someone, that we saw next to no level of use of the baton. And at some point we had to weigh that out. It's like, well, if they're carrying it but they won't use it, if they're hesitant to use it because they just don't, they're afraid that they don't know their own strength, they're afraid that as they take the swing the person's going to turn away sideways. The potential to strike a target in the wrong place is very high, because you're trying to take this baton strike at a moving object in most cases. I mean, it's not like, yeah, just stand still, I'm going to whack you right here, It's not like that. And where we want them to strike is in large muscle masses to avoid hitting bones and breaking bones and things like that. So it was a tool that the officers really didn't use that much.
And I'll tell you, the couple times that it was used, it was not very effective.
No.
I mean, it caused a lot of injury, and it was a small part of the equation of ultimately getting the person subdued. They were both multiple strikes. I mean, I think between 5 and 8 strikes on each. And so, I was an instructor for that. And what I would tell people is, if you're justified in hitting someone with a baton, you hit them with a baton and get this thing over with. And it's exactly what the assistant chief said, was that people were reluctant to do that. I mean, these are good people who are trying to do the right thing at the right time for the right reason. They're not trying to be malicious about it. And so maybe they go in there and go, oh, I think I need to hit this guy with a baton. Then you hit him about 45%. Well, hitting him 100%, it has a limited amount of effectiveness. You hit him at 45, and Now he's gone from mad to pissed. And, you know, now look at yourself as a third person here. You're watching this. He hits him, whack. Doesn't work. And he hits him again. In order to, you know, he keeps ramping it up. And eventually he's hitting this guy 6 or 7 or 8 times. Granted, they weren't full strikes, but what does that person say? The police officer hit him 8 times with this piece of hardened steel. And so, you know, when I talked about embracing technology and maybe kind of pushing some things to the side that are not as commonplace in today's law enforcement, that's kind of what I was alluding to. And they have a totally legitimate role in different environments. They have a totally legitimate role in riot control because of control holds and deterrent and using it as a defensive tool and stuff like that. So I'm mostly speaking from a patrol operations standpoint. That's kind of my background. So.
But let me comment on Mike's conscientiousness on this issue, because Mike is our one expandable baton instructor. And yet Mike is the one who came forward to the staff and said, you know, with these tasers coming online, you know, I don't know if we should be keeping the staffs out there or not. So despite it's a tool that he has been an advocate for, a trainer for, and so on, he recognized that they weren't getting used, and when they were being used, they weren't being effective. And he came forward to us as a staff and said, and I think we're probably better served with the tasers.
Worked myself out of a job there.
You did. You don't get to talk about it.
I looked at the upcoming ASP calendar. There's no cool schools coming down the road, so I figured I might as well. If there had been something in Fort Lauderdale, you might have to hold on to.
Aren't there some, for instance, a baton, some things seem more sinister or more able to incite somebody to want to calm down into becoming more aggressive? I mean, even when you say hands-on, some people,
Oh yeah.
you've invaded their space now,
Oh, yeah.
and they just get down in the corner.
That's a really astute observation. Is people have hot buttons, and sometimes it's being touched. You know, you go up to touch somebody and they're, get your hands off me. And to others, it may be, for whatever reason, it may be a baton if they see that baton, or they, for whatever. Any of these could have a kind of an unforeseen negative effect, counter effect, and we don't know that. We don't know these people's history. What I've always tried diligently to do is to never even ask somebody. I could ask somebody. I never even tell somebody to do something if I can't make them do it ultimately. You know, kind of the old formula is you ask them to do it, you ask them to do it, you tell them to do it, and then you make them do it. Well, I figure there's no sense in telling them to do it if I can't make them do it. And so if I hit somebody's hot button and I'm not totally justified and prepared to do it, then we get kind of a problem there, because I've unnecessarily amped this thing up. So, yes.
And isn't there something that dispatch has available to the officers too, in the event that it is available? Say somebody has a history of not being very compliant with certain officers, is that some of that information can be passed on prior to approaching those folks to kind of help give the officers a little more of a, not necessarily an advantage, but a little more of a
history.
Better scope.
What he's referring to is we have some history information on locations and on people, and it's you take it with a grain of salt, so to speak. There is history on people that I'm not even kidding you. I rode motors between 1998 and 2001. When I was a brand new motor officer, I got some officer safety history on this guy. He has a 9mm handgun that he keeps in his car when I was in contact with him. So I said, "You still have your gun?" "No, I sold it at the pawn shop." When I stepped out here, made sure he didn't have it. And to this day, officer safety information is still in on this person. Completely stale, completely out of date. And so it's a delicate deal. You take it for what it's worth, you know. And sometimes they have the dates it was entered. Certainly something from last night can mean a lot more to me than something from 1998. So the history information can help you. It's something you plug it in, you know, and if things go bad, it's information you kind of have.
There was that infamous, that was discontinued.
Oh,
LAPD,
the lateral vascular neck restraint.
Yeah.
Just a second. Just a second. Rusty's the last practitioner that we have of the lateral vascular neck restraint, but he'd go on for the rest of the night, so not to take any Mike's time. The lateral vascular neck restraint is still considered a viable technique. But like impact munitions, it ranks right up there close to lethal force. And we don't teach it to our officers anymore. They aren't given the instruction in their weaponless offensive tactics courses on it any longer. But it is still practiced in many, many places. And there are still practitioners, people who have received that training, who certainly in those situations would be entitled to use it. The idea behind it is that you temporarily block the flow of blood to the brain, cause unconsciousness, and it gives you a short period of time to gain control of them. It's a similar incapacitating technique. So, the brachial carotid stun is another one. We also don't teach that, but that's one of those things that officers do learn in regards to the value to a very sharp, sudden, unexpected technique that will just, cause the person to basically recoil in shock for just long enough to be able to get your hands on them and get them under control.
So we got flashlight. Beanbag rounds. Some good positive reasons, some good advantages to the beanbag round.
Do you have an idea what it's going to feel like if they're shot?
To the officer?
Well, to the person.
Oh, like we saw in the video. Yeah, that could, it could be the perception that, whoa, just shoot guns at me. It's very much an impact weapon. It's just like a baton, but it's got a different delivery system, right? I mean, so the biggest advantage to it is it creates you a whole bunch of distance that you don't get with a baton or something like that. Good pain compliance. We know about pain compliance too. Can also be not so effective. Disadvantages, basically just about exactly like the other impact weapons, right? They cause major, bruising and bone and tendon ligament risk. So very much like the ASP or the PR-24, it's just a different delivery system. Offers you some distance. Direct firing of the pepper ball system. Advantages there. Sorry?
Gets their attention real quick.
Yep, absolutely. The pain, the stimulus. Bring in distance. Good distance. And the distance deal is actually nice in both directions because it has that point blank range thing. You don't have to worry about minimum distances. When you're talking minimum distances with the beanbag round, you'd be about 7, 8, 9 feet minimum from them because you need some of that speed to scrub off in the air before it hits them. So the pepper ball doesn't quite limit you like that. So
you also have like a direct application or just kind of broad when you're shooting at a building or something too with them.
Right, yeah. We're talking direct application pepper ball stuff here. So, and when we're using OC rounds, we get kind of dual benefit there, right? We get pain compliance and we get the exposure to the OC-10. Nice combination because one or the other may not necessarily be very effective on a person under a particular circumstance. Lethal force, I mean, it is what it is. Obviously, the major disadvantage is you run the risk of taking a life or seriously changing a person's life forever if you ever have to use that. And it's, what's the good side of that? The only good side, I guess, would be that you've defended yourself or you defended another person. And that's always too bad. So, everybody's with me? We're seeing how we've got good things, bad things. Not everything's going to work on everybody all the time, under every circumstance. So now, how do you make these decisions about what tool you use? There's a myriad of them. I mean, they're going to range from factors within your control, factors beyond your control. We'll hit some of the highlights here. I'll talk to you about how they work into a major case law that's used in use of force review. Someone tell me one factor that you would consider to escalate or de-escalate your use of force. Oftentimes, they're just polar opposites. If it's there, it means you escalate. If it's not there, it means you de-escalate. Sometimes it's a neutral. Yes?
Say what?
Okay, so they have a weapon or close proximity to a weapon would be a reason to justify increasing use of force.
Individual's demeanor.
How they're acting, right? That's one of our points on that case there. So are they passive, are they static, or are they actively resisting, are they combative? Another one?
I heard compliance.
They comply? A huge concern in use of force is the ability to de-escalate. And I'll tell you what, when you can find an officer who can do that, I think he or she's going to be a leader for you because to be able to go from up here and jack it down to get, to when the compliance is gained is difficult. It's difficult for anybody. And people who can do it through just their own makeup or through years of experience or training, it's invaluable. Another one? Talked a little bit about if you know that you have alcohol influence or drug influence or mental problems or some heightened mental state on the part of the person. How about why you're there? Or the offense that the person is suspected of committing. Right? That should be a big factor. In fact, it's one of the three major prongs that we use in reviewing use of force, but it's the offense the person is committing. So are you going to be more likely to use major use of force against the person who is committing a non-arrestable city civil violation, an open container violation? It's going to be hard. There's other circumstances that go into it, but you need to really consider why you're there. Or, a couple weeks ago, we had a person in town here who was wanted for shooting in Spokane. He had an active warrant for attempted homicide and assault with a weapon. And immediately, our use of force goes right to SWAT application without knowing anything else. That's where we start looking, right? So use of force, or I'm sorry, the offense that they're suspected of committing has to be considered. How about another one?
So the safety or security of yourself or other persons is a factor.
Sure. How about another one? They're endless. If I'm that rural officer that we talked about who tased the person, got compliance eventually, and then put the taser down and went in, he's by himself. That's something to consider. I mean, if I'm going to arrest you and you don't want to go, but I got a whole patrol team behind me, it's going to be a little bit suspect as to why we're using significant use of force. If you're unarmed and I've got people to come and get you, right? We should go in and grab her and arrest her. And the opposite side of that, if you're alone in a house arresting a person and his entire family is there, should your force be going up or down? It should be going up because you are at risk here. You don't know who these people are. I guess maybe should is not the right word. I should say your use, you should consider these escalations and de-escalations of force based on these factors. I shouldn't say you should do this or you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, if he's totally compliant and all those other factors, then the fact that he's there with his family is not necessarily going to be an issue. But their demeanor could and also would be considered in regards to it. If they're going nuts, you know you need to get him out of there quick, and so you may have to use a slightly higher level of force to do so expeditiously and get him out of there than if there was no one else involved.
Does the time of day ever come into the equation?
It could be a factor.
Whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning, or if it's 6 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning.
Consider this: when April Brody went to the taser application, if you don't know the story, they rolled up on a male versus female disturbance, and this person was not compliant and ended up being a wrestling match in the middle of the street in the middle of the night. Time of day here is more related to visibility. I mean, you're on a public roadway at night. That needs to be considered, I think, because you need to get this resolved and get off the road before you get run over. So I could see it from a visibility standpoint. How about the context in which your contact happens? So if I'm going to arrest Tristan and they say he has a warrant, got my 2 people here with me, and we go walking up to him and we tell him, you have a warrant, you're under arrest, and you turn around, put your hands behind your back. We're ready, right? We know there's a warrant, we know we're gonna go arrest him, we know when you put your hands on people is the most vulnerable time. You kind of have this little rehearsal going on, right? Contrary to that, you're walking in on a domestic and a person jumps out from behind the bushes and tries to start choking you out. The context in which we've come in contact with this person is very much different, right? You're now, it's a sudden attack, and you're now at a significant position of disadvantage. And I'll say the should here. Your use of force should go through the roof because you are exposed, your weapons are exposed, your air supply is being compromised, and so that's important as to how you come in contact with the person. Is the person an active threat? We talked a little bit about how they're acting. If they're a threat to yourself or somebody else, immediately your use of force needs to go with that. So can you see how everything can be a factor for you? Everything can be a factor against you. Not for you, against you, but everything can be a factor to justify the increase in force. Conversely, it could be a factor to decrease the use of force. And it's all about recognizing these factors and perceiving them, plugging them in to your decision making here, and coming up with the right answer. And it's not easy. It can be difficult. So,
Mike, would Stacy Lear and Sean Lenahan likely choose the same force options?
Do you guys know those officers?
How many people rode with either Stacy Lear or Courtney Barrett or some? We have 13 female police officers on our department, and I would venture to say 75% of them are 5 foot or less. Okay. They're great cops, but they are smaller. So the stature makes a significant difference, as opposed to the imposing presence of Sean Lenahan or Duncan Crawford or J.C. Denton or some of the.
Hey, why am I not in there?
Okay, so Mike and the women.
No, he's exactly right. The relative size and strength, and even past knowledge that they have, past experience. If you're a black belt or something, and you have these different skills, you are at an advantage to taking care of yourself without the use of other tools that somebody who is just your average guy without that martial arts expertise or combat veteran expertise or something like that's a good point. So how do we judge all this stuff? How do we decide if the officer did use the right amount of force, the reasonable and necessary amount of force? First of all, is it fair for somebody to sit back and say, well, yeah, you knew he was acting weird, but that's not because he was a threat to you, it's just because he was off his medication, so you should not have tased this person. You should have just spoken softly to him and you'd calm down. Is that fair?
You don't know.
Only if you
What do we call that? Bobby Houck gets it every Monday. Yeah, 20/20 hindsight. I mean, everybody's an expert after it's all done and it's gone one way or another, and they can sit back and digest it. And that's absolutely not appropriate. The appropriate way to review the use of force is through the eyes of a reasonable officer in that situation under those circumstances. So they describe it as being rapid and unstable circumstances, rapidly developing and unstable circumstances. And that's the eyes in which use of force needs to be judged, whether it's by the sergeant or whether it's by the chief of police or a judge or jury or whatever. The United States Supreme Court has a case which they apply a 3-pronged test to this. It's called the case called Connor, and it is you may actually recognize some of these from what we talked about in our factor. The nature of the offense committed, whether the person is actively trying to resist or escape, whether this person is a threat to the officer or somebody else. And that's how they view this stuff. And so you need to consider those things almost simultaneously when you're pulling in your tool bag here about what's appropriate and what's not. because the United States Supreme Court does it, and the chief of police does it, and the sergeant does it. So, and everybody in between. That's the standard. And like it, dislike it, have no feeling on it. I mean, that is where you're at, and that's how we judge things interdepartmentally in the courts. Does that make sense? Is that reasonable? What we're looking at, how the person's acting, are they correct? So, you make your decision here, there's going to be a lot of things at stake. Someone tell me what would be at stake to inappropriately, what's at stake for the police officer if he inappropriately uses force? What is it?
Your badge.
Your
They'll
job,
sue you.
right?
Yeah.
You got two of them. Your job, the loss of your job, loss of money, right? So if they're assuming that, take my mortgage, but we get a little bit of equity, just fraction equity in it. Loss of money, loss of career. What else?
Loss of
Your loss of life.
Yeah, well, that's with the money.
If you use inappropriate, if you use less force.
Oh, you're ahead of your time. She's talking if you use inappropriate force in the other way. You use too little force, you run the risk of losing life, right? Or being seriously injured.
And it's
Some
a
others.
people thing.
Yes, you like the loss of your duty to protect people, right? You failed your duty.
You lose a lot of respect from the community too if you're using inappropriate.
Right. Excellent. And that's a really good comment. I was going to talk about it as loss of reputation. I was thinking about it within our department, but you offered me something there I missed. Our reputation outside of the department. I was viewing it as loss of reputation within the department. If you get a reputation of being somebody who's heavy-handed or somebody who's inappropriate, people are not going to want to work around you. And I'll tell you, it works the other way too. If you get a reputation of being somebody who cannot take care of themselves or protect their other officers or protect, the people in the community, people are not going to work around you. We're boxing you into a pretty narrow deal there, but that's the job. I'm sorry. I know it says it's going to be easy, but that's the job, and you use the right amount. So loss of reputation inside the department, outside the department. Criminal prosecution, loss of freedom, right? You go to prison. You commit a criminal act. Say loss of prosecution. You don't want to lose that. Right? You can be put in jail. You can commit an offense, charged with crime, be incarcerated. So there's a few things on the table here, right?
Mike, I'm just putting something up here that we do in our tactical communications training, and that is point out to officers the 5 ways that they can be held accountable for improper behaviors. And as opposed to, everybody's familiar with the concept of double jeopardy. Well, police officers can legally be held accountable in 5 different venues. State and federal civil court, state and federal criminal court, and administratively in terms of their job. So, in case this doesn't make any sense, this is exactly what happened, for instance, in the Rodney King case, where they were first charged with federal violations, but then they ultimately faced state violations. We have state offenses regarding the mistreatment of a prisoner, for example. So there was a deputy over in Deer Lodge, Powell County, that tased a individual who was handcuffed and in a holding cell. And he wouldn't go lay down on the bunk, so he tased him through the food tray port in order to get him to go lay down. Well, he ultimately was charged at the state level criminally with mistreatment of a prisoner. He was sued in state court. He's still facing a 1983 violation, and now this one is the hardest one. Federal criminal violation requires purposeful use of unlawful force to deprive a person of their rights. So it has a little bit different standard, but if it's serious enough, and this, like this guy was, where he purposely did this, knowing that it was not an appropriate thing to do. So he faces 5 different things, because on top of it, he had the administrative side, he was fired. So those are all the things that an officer faces every time they have to make that decision of right or wrong.
So we got what's at stake here. By using too much force, we have the loss of your job, loss of loss of money, you can be sued, loss of your freedom, you can be incarcerated, loss of reputation inside the department, outside the department. This could probably go on and on. Use too little force, and you could fail in your duty to protect somebody. You could have loss of life. You could end up dead, or you could have, serious injury yourself. Loss of reputation again. You have people who don't trust you, that they can count on you to come and bail them out. So there's a lot at stake here, and like I said, it boxes us in on both ends, and you got to get it right. They don't give free passes. They don't say, well, this is the first time you've been presented with the situation to use a taser, so I tell you what, we won't sue you this time. It doesn't happen. So you need to be right all the time. So,
and despite the case law or the criminal law and things that are there to try to see an officer through, as long as they perform within that box that Mike's talking about, you would think, okay, everything should go good from here. But there's all that second guessing that still happens, and there's all, the lawsuits still come. As the old saying goes, you can sue anybody for anything, anytime. Winning, it's another matter. But the lawsuits pile up on you. At any one particular point in time, I know that we have anywhere from 2 to 5 lawsuits going, almost at all times. Very seldom do you ever hear about all the lawsuits that are settled, that we don't pay out a dime for, but you do hear about the ones that we have to pay settlements on. And that is also stressful to the officers, knowing that if they're being judged and they're judged to have been in the wrong, that they face all of these possibilities. We do try to provide good counseling for the officers. We have the critical incident stress debriefing teams that are available to help in those regards. And we ask our supervisors especially to keep a close eye on their people, to monitor for the possibility that a person is experiencing some form of post-traumatic stress syndrome.
So we need to put you guys under a little bit of stress here, see what kind of decisions you can make. Because we are still hiring, right, Mark?
Yeah. September Academy.
When I paint out your scenario, unless I tell you otherwise, you're going to have what I have. You're going to have what the average police officer has here. You have firearm, silver tongue, weaponless defensive tactics, you have taser, personal carry OC-10. And if you have anything special, I'll let you know. So, okay? And then we're going to talk about what's at stake here, right? The loss of your profession, loss of your money, loss of your freedom, loss of your reputation, loss of your life, loss of someone else's life. And I want to hear some answers quickly, and then you're going to justify them, okay? So you're driving down the street late at night in a rural environment that has a heavily populated bar district. You see 2 guys fighting and a big crowd around it, and you jump out, and you need to restore peace here. And at stake is your loss of freedom, loss of career, loss of money, loss of life. Haven't had a decision yet. Let's hear a decision. Come on, back up. Use the force option.
Sirens. So you can disperse a lot of the crowd.
Okay, so presence, right? You roll in, you hit the siren a little bit, and let them know that you're there, see if your presence. Very good. Doesn't work. What's next?
Back up.
Call for more backup.
Is this thing working?
I want to be on the loudspeaker, tell everyone to get back and talk to and verbalize.
Okay, so
with the 2 people fighting.
Okay, so we've given them verbal command, right? Doesn't work.
Move the car
Where are we at now?
to the crowd. See if we can disperse them.
Okay, kind of a more robust presence, right? You're bringing the car in right amongst them. Still doesn't work.
Shoot him.
Get out.
pulling out their pepper spray and take
Okay.
them out.
Okay.
And go start from there.
So we sprayed them, right? And
Half the crowd gets it too.
yep, they quit fighting and they're rubbing their eyes and now that backup that you guys have all been calling for. Heck, the way you guys were calling, we got Spokane County Sheriff. So they're here now and we get them buckled up and we leave, right? So who was the first one that said spray them?
Huh?
Who said spray them? All right, why?
Because they're already in a bunch of pain. So at this point, we need to affect other aspects. We get their eyes watering because they can't see how they're doing.
Why didn't you just go grab them?
Because there's a crowd around. There's too much of a liability against you and the people in the crowd.
Not
If
your
they
best
take your gun in that crowd, they could hurt, kill anybody out there.
So the presiding thought is that you're not going to jump in there and wrestle with them. You're bringing a gun to a wrestling match. You're exposed. You're outnumbered. Probably going to be ineffective, right? Why didn't you tase them?
Who would you
Only
tase?
gotta do one
Active.
person.
Good.
You didn't have time
What
to
if-
flip a coin and see which one was gonna get.
Yeah.
You gotta be a pretty good
If
shot.
it's someone wearing a USC Trojan sweatshirt, then I'd tase that person. Notre Dame fans got to tase the Trojan. Right? Okay.
You gotta be a good shot. Use a taser.
Right? They're rolling around.
It's gonna
Well, you
work
start
out.
tasing somebody's buddy, he's gonna have a place to come after you.
Okay.
Plus, you're not
Is
sure
there
how
any-
the crowd's gonna react.
Yeah, I'd get upset with that.
Okay.
You could piss one person off, they can all just.
What can an officer reasonably expect is going on with two people who are at night in a downtown bar district fight? Reasonably, you don't know that for sure. You didn't follow them around and watch how many shots they had. But you can reasonably expect that there's some type of chemical there that's altering their mood, right? Okay, so pretty good use of force. Man, I was trying to create some stress here. You guys are just kind of thinking it over. Okay. But pretty good use of force, you justified it all right. Okay, another one is you and another officer go get summons to the district court judge's chambers, and you walk in and there's an adult female there, apparently unarmed, and the district court judge says she was in contempt of my court and I want her taken to jail. And she's on the other side of the judge's nice desk here, and she backs up and she says, I'm a mother, I'm doing this for my kids, and I'm not going to jail. Okay, use of force decision here. You have a loss of life on your, loss of reputation, loss of life. What's at stake here? Loss of your career, loss of money. What else is at stake?
Well, you gotta tell them
Reputation.
that you're gonna make her comply, and then you have two people,
Okay.
one takes each side of it.
Okay, so you told her and you went up and you grabbed her. That's your use of force decision?
Well, and then you see if she's struggling, I guess.
Okay, so as you grab her and she kind of puts up a little college effort and then gives up and you handcuff her. Okay? So, why did you go grab her? Why didn't you just tell her that over and over and that it's time to go to jail?
Well, you tell her that first, but you just go around the desk and, you don't tell them to do something unless you can make them do it.
Okay.
And
She
just
said
people
she
there.
wasn't going to go.
Yeah, sure. It said she wasn't.
You could try to tell her. She's gonna have
Okay. Why didn't you spray her? She signaled her intent. She said, I'm not going to jail.
Shoot cop person.
Okay, so you got the advantage, officers versus subject. Why didn't you spray her?
Non-selective.
If you go in and break her wrist, the chief is going to want to know, I gave you the OC's 10, why didn't you spray her?
Because the judge is really going to be mad.
You're in the judge's
Pepper
chambers,
spray.
the courthouse, which may actually have a jail attached to it in the same resolution. Okay, here's another one. You are actively looking for a known drug user, known felony offender. He's an IV drug user. He's got 2 separate warrants for $50,000 apiece, and you spot him on a bike. And you go look, and you go to intercede or interview with him. He takes off running. And officers chase him around a store, catch him in the back, knock him down. He gets up and runs. They knock him down again. They jump on him, and they're wrestling with him. And they cannot get him in custody. And by the time you get there, they've been wrestling for a few seconds. And you need a use of force decision here. Don't forget your house is at stake, your career is at stake, your freedom's at stake. You tased him already? Why'd you tase him?
Well, that's an area I did.
He's obviously not himself.
What's our offense? We've got some significant felony offenses that we have warrants issued for. We're not just suspecting, we have warrants issued.
Chances are he's on drugs.
He's already
Did you say the
fought
officers
with
were on the
officers.
ground with him?
Yeah, you roll up and they're fighting.
So you
That's when you yell, "It's down clear."
Well, you announce taser, they get off, tasing you.
Well, chances are he's on some sort of drug.
Why didn't you spray him?
Because the officers.
Why didn't you shoot him with a beanbag round?
Isn't going to incapacitate him.
Yeah, you're right there on it. Okay. You get a call of a suicidal Hispanic male in a motel room who reportedly has a big knife. He's drunk. He's mumbling something in Spanish. And you get there and you find a suicidal guy in a motel room. The door open, big knife. He's drunk. He's mumbling things in Spanish. You cannot get him to comply. On this one, you also have a beanbag gun and you have a dog with you. So what's your use of force here? Remember, your life's at stake, your house at stake, your job's at stake, your money's at stake. His life, the duty to protect him is at stake. What's our use of force decision?
Call the negotiators.
Okay? Don't have that kind of time. He's making hesitation marks and he looks like he's going to plunge this into his chest. Who's beanbag? Okay? How come?
Because you can knock the knife out of his hand and staple him.
Okay, why didn't you send the dog in again?
Because it gets
You can get the dog.
Yeah.
Okay. Why didn't you shoot him with OC-10? Spray him with OC?
Are you gonna get?
Why didn't you shoot him with your own gun? He brought the gun to the fight, right? Or he brought a knife to the fight, right? You shoot him?
Because he's
No, he's not threatening you. Threatening himself.
Okay, good.
Now, it was a rubber gun, we find out later.
Rubber knife.
Never take a rubber gun to a knife.
Yeah. Doesn't really change it, does it?
No,
Why?
it's still justified
You don't know
because
that.
we don't
You
know.
didn't know that.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. Everybody comfortable with shooting him with beanbag round?
Taser.
You tasered him too? Probably.
Yeah.
How about running him over with a car?
Been
tried.
You guys didn't really embrace my stress like I'd have liked. No, just teasing. The idea here is, on those scenarios, is that there's a lot at stake. It's rapidly evolving and unstable, and you need to make the decision. You need to make it pretty quickly. Some of them have a minute or two or three to develop. Some of them will be instant and anywhere in between. So all four of those, or how many do you do, 4 or 5? Those are all use of force scenarios I've been in, and with the exception of calling for the Washington State Patrol as backup. Those are all what I did. Spray the guys downtown, right? You get the mutual, you get the added benefit of crowd dispersion and stuff. You get 2 people for the price of 1, so to speak. Shot the guy with the beanbag round because tasing him was a challenge. You need to remember you got to get 2 probes in there. We're back far enough. I didn't know that I'd get 2 probes in there. The gal in contempt of the judge's court. Of course, you're not going to spray, and we did at the time. The jail was up there, and so you're not going to spray something to run the risk of having to evacuate the entire courthouse. You just walk over and grab her and arrest
If you
her.
know she's unarmed, would it be appropriate in that case to say, when she's saying she got her kids and she's doing this for her kids' sake, that your kids are gonna be better off if you just cooperate? I mean, you guys.
Yeah, and there was some dialogue.
Down before-
Yeah, and there was a fair amount of dialogue. In the interest of time, I rushed us through that, but yeah, we stood there and talked to her for several minutes.
These are actual cases.
Yeah, these are things the scenarios that I've been exposed to, and that's what we did. Was we talked to her and we said, this is the deal. There's not a choice here, and that's an interesting one for the Graham, the Graham standard of the type of offense you're looking for. It's just a misdemeanor. It's a misdemeanor. It's contempt of court, but it's not like you can walk away from it. There's a judge standing there telling you take her to jail.
Exactly.
So that's an interesting one in the type of offense it's taken. But
For members of the council, a couple of years ago in a city council meeting back east, the mayor ordered one of the council members arrested because that council member during the open meeting was arguing with the mayor. And the police officer went to arrest the council member who fought back, and they pepper sprayed him. I guess they used mace, and there was a heck of a lawsuit there.
Yeah, what authority does the mayor order somebody arrested?
He doesn't. Good point, Jason.
Actually, there is one solitary instance, and that is incitement to riot or riotous behavior, where by statute he can give the order to make arrests.
But what you're going to see council members, we talked about security in council chambers, and you have the panic button, and it's really a fine line from someone being passionate about their subject and going to the point where you need to push the panic button for cops. And boy, that's a big gray area that's hard to see. So we're at the end of our night tonight. Mike, thank you very much. Next week we'll be at the Holiday Inn for our last night. We're going to have a panel discussion with officers, and so I encourage you to write down questions and see how many you can stump them with. And that's pretty much our last night, is that panel discussion. And so there was some good shooting tonight. Who thinks they shot the best here? Huh? Jason!
I shot too late.
Who shot the worst? Everybody.
Casey's trying to claim that one.
Yeah. Why did you shoot so bad?
Why or how?
Why?
There was he was eating our brains. And not until he started coming up.
That shows you just a little bit of the decision making the police officer has to make. And we really do appreciate you being here tonight, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.